stuff on the fire. Uvda d'chol means specifically, according to Rav Moshe, evoking, the more, I would say, like, industrial or industrial. I don't know if industrial is the word, but yes. According Tosos doesn't say. It's a question: how do you interpret Tosos? Right? He says somehow this particular type of a grinder is uvda d'chol. What makes it uvda d'chol?
Right, no. We're saying
Presumably, it's the more the way. What?
Saying it's uvda d'chol, but using your pestle with the
correct.
It's not uvda.
Right, and the way Rav Moshe explains is your mortar and pestle is the way you prepare spices in the home, whereas these other types of things are the way that you would do it, pre-house, the way it would be processed out there in the fields or in the industry, in the process of getting it to the store. Okay, let's now continue. Yudalid. We pick up with Tanu Rabbanan, about 10 lines from the bottom.
Can I just ask you a phrase?
Yeah.
What's the Ashle Rabrave?
On big trees, like you're suspending yourself on it. Right.
So
and then you have the straws apart. It's an idiom. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, about 10 lines from the bottom, Yudalid. Tanu Rabbanan, Ein Osim Tisni. On Yontiv, you cannot make tisni, which is some type of a grain-based dish. How does it say anything there about what tisni is?
It says grits made from wheat kernels that are split into quarters.
Grits made from wheat kernels that are split into quarters. Okay, so anyway, it's a grain-based dish that requires a lot of effort, a lot of tircha in doing it. So again, even though you can do ochel nefesh on Yontiv, they wanted to limit the amount of tircha.
So
you cannot make. Tochein isn't the problem because it's Yontiv. Okay, but you can't make it because of the effort. But 1 minute, now we're going to get to the next line. The ein kochin b'machteshet, but you also can't grind the wheat in a grinder. Right now, that sounds like categorically you can't because of a tochein concern. But why should that be different than grinding spices, which is normally tochein? I don't know if we mentioned that, but the normal malach of grinding spices is tochein grinding. Okay, but we allow it on Yontiv. So here is it that here we're dealing with wheat. So what's the story? You just can't make this dish that requires a lot of effort, or you can't grind at all. So that's what the Gemara asks. Tarti? How can you say both? Make up your mind. Either it's the problem with the dish, or it's the problem with grinding wheat. That somehow that's a bigger problem. So the Gemara says, fine. Here's what we mean. Ma tam ein osim tisni. Why can you not make this tisni? The fish ain't coaching b'machteshet. Because it's not really about the tisni, because fundamentally you can't grind with this machteshet. Okay, maybe that's also some type of uvda d'chol. Maybe those are more done things that are not sort of like home-based and so on in large scale. So now we're going to see 1 minute. Let's see the Gemara continues. The lema ain't coaching b'machteshet. Just tell me, don't use a grinder. Why do you have to give me the example of this dish? Itani ain't coaching b'machteshet. If you had said that, Havi Amina, I would have said, b'machteshet gedola. That's only a large grinder, again, because the large more is this uvda d'chol, as we've been talking about. Aval, b'machteshet ketana, a small, like little home-based one, ein mashabir dami, maybe it would be okay. Kamash malon, so it says both. It says don't do it, and then it sends it in, so it's a little bit redundant to underscore that you cannot use any type of a wheat grinder, even a small one. Okay, which is again a little bit funny, and therefore the Gemara says is going to pull back on that because again, why mention particularly one particular type of a dish? The Gemara says Vatani, but we taught in Beitzah ain't coaching b'machteshes gedola. You can't use a big grinder. Ava coaching b'machteshes ketana. You can use a small wheat grinder. So if you take a look, by the way, at Rashi, why is that different? So Rashi says 5 lines on the bottom. Ava coaching b'ketana dahavi kil achar yad de'ena elu l'tavlin. A small one is normally used for spices, so it's doing it with a shinoi. Again, not exactly clear why you need a shinoi, but again, presumably a big one is this uvda d'chol concern again. So, kamash milan. So Gemara says, fine, you're right. We retract our previous position when we said don't make tisni, because you don't grind with a grinder. Don't make tisni at all, even if you're using a small grinder, because that's tircha, that's a lot of effort. And don't use a big grinder, but a small wheat grinder for other things, that would be okay. Just 1 minute. Rava says, lo kash, it's not difficult. Halan v'halahu. It's a difference between us and Eretz Yisrael. Now, what's the difference between us and Eretz Yisrael? As we're going to see, in Eretz Yisrael, they had slaves, or servants, or slaves, and therefore, although it's funny, the Gemara often mentions slaves of the house of the Reish Galusa, who were often very not scrupulous about halacha, but here we're sort of saying that's a larger problem in Eretz Yisrael society. And therefore, for them, when we said you can't use even a small one, that was our interpretation earlier, that would be for Bnei Eretz Yisrael, that if they use a small, we let you use a small one, they'll claim they used a big one. But here in Bavel, when we're not afraid of that type of impropriety or lack of scrupulousness, we allow people to use a small one. And now we're going to have a story that supports it. Rav Papi ikla lebei Mar Shmuel. So Rav Papi came to the house of Mar Shmuel. Aisi le daisa. They brought him some oatmeal, anyanta, freshly ground oatmeal. He refused to eat it. Maybe they used a small grinder, which we said was okay, and certainly it's okay in Bavel. So no. He saw that it was very, very thin. It was done to the quality that you would only do in a big grinder. Okay, maybe it was prepared yesterday. They saw that it was like a very bright, the flakes were very bright, fresh, very freshly ground oatmeal, he could tell. So therefore, So therefore, he saw that it was done in a big grinder, and he refused to do it because you can't use a big grinder. The and if you want, you could say, Shani Beimar Shmuel, the Ika Pritzusa de Avdi. The house of Shmuel is different because the servants there, or the slaves there, are not scrupulous, and therefore it's like Eretz Yisrael, and therefore he felt that in that Shmuel's house they shouldn't be using even a small grinder because, again, of the concern about whether people are going to be scrupulous or not. Say that you use a big one and claim they've used a small one. But the basic halacha is you're allowed to use a small one, not a big one, and again, what's the concern with a big one? Presumably, again, this issue of uvda d'chol. Yes.
My question is, I seem to remember, unless I'm just getting confused, did we say Milisha v'elech, and isn't that in Yerushalmi Tosfos brought that?
Yes.
This is totally which is before last.
So that is an excellent question, and the principle of Lisha v'elech. What Michael is saying is he's reminding us of Tosfos, quoted in Yerushalmi, that said that the only malachas that you can do on Yantiv, it's not everything. You can't go out and start harvesting, your wheat and cutting down your wheat, are only things that are from the type of adding the water onwards. And these things, the grinding and the sifting and the threshing that we've been discussing, are things that precede Lisha. So that's an excellent question, and you could try to claim, well, maybe that's why we're introducing these ideas of shinoi, but it doesn't work because we said, for example, spices can be kedarko, right? So although the molo melilos we said was a shinoi, but spices were kedarko. So it's an excellent question, and it forces most to say, obviously that principle is not absolute, and there's a lot of discussion about that. But I will tell you again, and this conceptually it works very nicely. Why should we say only from Lisha onwards? Why is the moment of kneading different than the threshing and the harvesting and the grinding and the winnowing and all of that? Well, the basic logic of the difference is that all that other stuff happens before you get it to the house. Exactly. Whereas Lisha are the home-based malachas. So the same with grinding. There's the grinding of turning wheat into flour, which is not done in the house. There's the grinding of spices, and there's the grinding of taking wheat kernels and making oatmeal, which is done in the house. So it could be, rather than a categorical distinction of malachas 1 through 12 no, and 13 through 39 yes, or whatever it is, the difference is, again, whether home-based or not home-based. And that seems to be a very good way of categorizing the differences, and that also explains the concerns of uvda d'chol. Uvda d'chol is, it's true, you are grinding the spices in the home, but if you're using a vessel that evokes the type of grinding that is outside of the home, that's the problematic one. That's the type of vessel you can't be using. So it's an excellent question. The easiest way of understanding it, it's not particularly categorical malachos. It's mostly like the locus of the malacha. Yes.
So there have been times in history when most wheat was ground in homes, although obviously it wasn't here.
Really? I mean, then they have these big water mills and whatever that they ground the wheat in?
Yes, but not everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And you can actually buy home wheat grinders, and a lot of people actually like to do that because they think they get fresher. My question is this a categorical distinction, or might it change depending
Well,
whether you have a home wheat
what
grinder?
we're seeing right now is if you use a small machteshet, you can do it. Now Rashi says a small machteshet is made for spices, right?
Uh-huh.
It's not so clear from the Gemara. The Gemara could be talking about a home-based small wheat grinder, grinder that's made for wheat, but it's made for the small-scale grinding that you do at home.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's a good question.
Here's a picture of one
There you
being
go.
loaded.
Excellent. Okay. All right. So let's continue. But I think you get the conceptual categories. Let's look now at the next Mishnah. Habor kitnio. So we're going through the malachas here. We've done disha, which is like the threshing, essentially, the removing of the husks. We've done tochen, the grinding, and now we're going to do borer. All of these are classic malachas, as Michael pointed out, that normally are in the field with the grain, but also take place in the home on different contexts. And the same is with borer. What's the story with borer on Yom? Let's take a look at the Mishnah. Borer kitnias bi Yom. You are separating out your legumes. Again, we had this before. You remove the husks, and then you have to separate. After you've separated the thing from the husks, they're mixed together, and then you have to, separate them out. So Beitzah mean borer ochel v'ochel. You separate out the food and you eat it, meaning you do it like on Shabbos. You do ochel mitok psolet, you focus on the food, and then you eat it immediately. So that's considered derech achila, right? So that's basically how you're allowed to do that type of thing on Shabbos.
Amazing, there's no difference.
So for Beit Shammai, it's not clear whether Yom Tov is any different than Shabbos. You focus on the food and you eat it. But Beit Hillel, Beit Hillel says, borer kedarko. No, you could do like you would normally do borer, which maybe means you remove the psolet. Not the food, and becheko, you do it either in like your chest, meaning like in your lap. Bekanun betamcha, you can use even a vessel or funnel. You cannot use, and this you might remember, we had the same thing before when we were talking about getting the wheat removed from the husks. You cannot use like a big sifter or a colander or whatever, a vessel made specifically for borer, for sifting. But basically he says, other than using a vessel made specifically for sifting, you can do borer the normal way you would do it. So again, and maybe the whole problem of this vessel is like we've been saying before. Maybe it's this uvda d'chol concern. Fundamentally, borer is okay. Just don't use a very professionalized vessel for it, which makes it much more uvda d'chol, rather than focused on the immediate home use. Rabbi Gamliel says you can even wash them off and then scoop it from the top. Like, you put it in water and the chaff falls to the bottom and the other stuff on the top, and you scoop it off from the top. Let's take a look at the Gemara. Tanya, we're talking about Beitzah. When is it that you Beit Hillel says that you remove the psolet? When there's more food than psolet. So removing the psolet you're removing the minority. Of a psolet merubal or ochel, if there's more psolet than there is ochel, the food is the minority and the waste is the majority. Then you remove the ochel. So you focus on what is lesser rather than what's larger, presumably because of the issue of, as we're going to see, not a definition of borer, which again is not seen as a problem, but as the Gemara is going to say, a question of tircha. You want to do it in a way that minimizes the effort.
Yeah,
so you always remove, no, Shabbos is totally different. We'll get to Shabbos in this. This is Yom Tov, where fundamentally it's mutter. But you have to do it in a way which focuses on the minority thing, because that minimizes the tircha. And we'll see the Gemara will make it clear in a minute. I'll get back to you in a second. So the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says, "Psolas merubal ochel." 1 minute. If there's more chaff, more waste than there is food, migaman deshari. Who would allow it? Why not? So what Rashi says is that if this thing is majority chaff, it's muktzah. Right, there's little food buried in it, but it's mostly chaff. Then basically you don't, then this whole thing as a totality is looked at as not food. It's mukta. Who can move it? No, lo tzricha. You need it for the following case: it's true. There's a minority of it in quantity. So fundamentally, it's food. It's not waste. It's not chaff. The amount of psolas is the minority. But if you were to focus on the psolas to remove it, it would be more effort to remove the psolas. Right, based on how they're connected, it's usually easier to remove one rather than the other. So based on the particular way they're mixed and connected, it's more effort to remove the psolas than the ochel, and in that case, you remove the ochel. So the basic point is, according to Beit Hillel, you always do it the way which minimizes the tircha. The key in the Gemara is that phrase at the end, nafish b'tircha, which means again that the principle is there is not a borer concerned. It's yontiv. The concern is just do it in a way that minimizes the tircha and don't use a professional vessel. And those are the two concerns that we continue to have by yontiv, even when you're doing malachas of food preparation. Number one, like we talked before about this crushed wheat dish. You shouldn't have too much tircha. That's an issue. We don't want you to have to be a lot of effort on Yantav. And number two, the professional vessel because of the uvda dechol. Those are the concerns. But again, look at this. You really can on Yantav. You're there. You're chopping your your red peppers, and you got the seeds and whatever. If it's Yantav, you basically don't have to worry about borer. If again, it's that house-based type of a preparation. All you have to do is do it in a way that minimizes the effort. Now, as far as Shabbos is concerned, it has nothing to do with minimizing the effort. Correct. It's about defining it as derech achila. So what defines it as derech achila is you take the food and you put the food into your mouth, and it's always about doing the ocha.
Right, that's what I meant. It makes no difference if it's ocha murim b'psola.
Oh, okay, fine. I didn't hear. Yes, by far it's just always about the ocha. Yes.
Now, if you use the example of your pepper with the seeds inside, I understand. But the example is kidney or like pieces of or kernels of grain. Now,
yes.
You're gonna have more psola than you have ocha. It's a one-to-one correspondence. It's like right? Every grain, every piece of kidney has like a husk on it.
Yeah,
right? The
we actually just ate edamame that was cooked in the pods this past Shabbat, and right at the table we squeezed out the beans to eat, and we had a lot of.
That would be a good example. Kidney has to be a good example where there's much bigger pods than there are seeds.
Yeah.
I will remind you that Rashi. But on Yud Bet Amud Bet that we learned on Shabbos, where it says don't use a sifter. I'll just read you the Rashi there. It's 3 lines from the bottom. You don't have to turn to it. On Yud Bet Amud Bet, Rashi says, "Demechzik man da'avi litzarch machar she'ein derech lasos bekelim halalu ela harbeh." So again, that is the other concern. He sort of uvda dechol by using certain types of vessels that are done large scale, not for immediate use, and that's the uvda dechol. Those are the two dominant concerns, even by malachas that are allowed because they're food based. Rabbi Gamliel says you can submerge it in water and then scoop off the stuff on the top. Tanya, we talk to Beitzah. I'm Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tzadok. Rabbi Gamliel. This was the practice in the house of Rabbi Gamliel. They would have a bucket filled with lentils, and they'd have the water, put water on it. The water would be on top of the of the lentils. And the chaff would rise to the above, and the food would be on the bottom. So the Gemara says, "Vatanya ipcha." 1 minute. The Beitzah says the opposite, that the food would be on the top and the chaff would go to the bottom. Lo kasha haba afra habigili. The difference is, are we talking about dirt, which is heavier, and that would fall to the bottom, and that would stay at the bottom, or are we talking about like the type of chaff, which is light, and that would float to the top? Okay, next Mishnah. So now we've covered a lot of malachas. We've covered dosh. We've covered tochen, and we've covered borer. And the common denominator is just do it in a way that doesn't have a lot of tircha, and do it in a way that does not use certain vessels which evoke uvda dechol. But not all vessels. Not right. You can use your mortar and pestle. You can use labor-saving devices, just not ones that evoke that whole large-scale uvda dechol. Next Mishnah. Beit Shammai Omer. Ein mishalchin. Now we get back to D'Rabbanan. Ein mishalchin b'Yom Tov ela manot. You can only send, if you're sending somebody a gift on Yom Tov, you can only send them a manot, like mishloach manot, right? Mishalchin manot, ish l'reyehu, something that is basically ready to be eaten, not something that requires preparation, even preparation that could be done on Yom Tov. Ubeitil omrim, and Beitil says, okay.
This is why? Because of you as a
because
of the recipient.
I don't know. It just seems like you don't want to, have to send something that might not. If somebody, even though technically somebody could cook it on Yom Tov, you send somebody a raw fish. They weren't planning on cooking it. Maybe it's a muktzah issue or it's a tircha issue. Yeah, I mean, not really muktzah, but
I say you clothes, nothing for you to do. You just put it on.
Okay, clothes would be probably included in that. Things that could be readily worn, readily used are okay, but not things that could not be, even if you could cook it on Yom Tov. You can even send livestock because you can always shecht it. bein chayim bein shchutim, whether alive or shechted. Mishalchin yenus shmanim usalvatot. You could send oil, wine, and flour, even though you'd have to turn the flour into dough. It's all things that in theory you could use, even though it requires effort. Vikidnios or legumes. Avalo tvuah. You can't send like unground grain. Okay, that presumably, although we did talk before about a certain type of, home grinding that could be done, presumably that would be, under all normal circumstances, not usable. Rabbi Shimon matir b'tvuah, Rabbi Shimon allows even that. Okay, and Rashi says, because as we learned, there are things you could do. You could use a small grinder. Okay, Tanit Rav Yechia, u'bavad shelo yasenu b'shura. So, not b'sora, b'shura. Even though we allow you to send these types of gifts, you can't do it like Yaakov sent to Esav. Gemara doesn't say that, but to me that's what it's evoking, which is a whole line of people bringing gifts. That makes it very, weekday-like, having all these people come and delivering gift after gift and so on. Also, I think that some of this, you have to understand the context, the Roman context of patronage and of the giving of gifts and the receiving of gifts, like the Gemara in Kiddushin talks about. Sometimes, you can mekadesh a woman by agreeing to receive a gift from her, because in that certain society of patronage, if you agree to receive a gift that's very sort of symbolically meaningful, it means that you're taking, you're being the patron of this person anyway. So it could be that also evokes certain types of, more business and commercial types of contexts as well. Anyway, Rashi says it's just making a big production out of things, which is not appropriate on Yom Tov. Tana,
the Molichim Limukor B'Shuk. It's like a business thing.
Yes, right. That's what Rashi says. Correct. Rashi says that if you have all these people bringing gifts, it looks like you're going to sell the stuff. Okay. Tana ain't shura pchusam shlosha b'nei adam. A shura would minimum 3 people. 2 people would not be considered a row of people bringing gifts. By Ravashi asks, plus a gavri plus a mine mai. Let's say you're sending with 3 people, but each person you're sending to bring a different gift. Some have the izimatayim, and some have the rechelim, and some have the tiashim. So is that considered like a row? Because each one is bringing something different. Maybe you look at each one individually. So take it. That we don't know. All right. Reb Shimon allows you to even send grain. Tanya, Reb Shimon Matir B'Tzvur, Kagon Chitim Lasos Man Ludiot, wheat to make from it ludiot, which Rashi says is a wheat-based dish. Sa'orim litain lifnei behemto, barley to give to your animal, and atashim and lentils lasos man resisin, which is a lentil-based dish. Okay, fine. Anyway, these are things that Beit Shammai, even Beit Hillel might not allow, just because it would be very unusual. The normal use for this thing would not be in a way you could do it on Yom Tov. Yes.
There was a whole thing about, maybe explain for a moment. There's a taboo about receiving gifts on Shabbos or Yom Tov. What is that?
And normally on Shabbos, you're not supposed to do a kinyan on Shabbos, right. But you can give a gift on Shabbos that can be used on Shabbos because it's allowed with Tzarech Shabbos, so that's okay. If you're going to give something on Shabbos that you think they won't use and you won't use immediately, and you want to be firm, what you do is you makne it to a third party before Shabbos, before you deliver it, or you give it to them on Shabbos and say, "I'm not being makne to you yet. You can take official possession of this after Shabbos." But generally,
for like after Kolden?
Yeah, but generally the point is that if you can be used on Shabbos, it's fine. So let's take a look at the next Mishnah. Mishalchin Kalim. Now that we talked about food, let's talk about more like non-consumables. You can send vessels, meaning clothing, Beit Tfurim, Beit She'enim Tfurim. This is according to Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, who has a broader allowance, whether the clothes are sewn or not sewn. So what are you going to do with not sewn clothes? Okay, we'll see. The Alpha B'Sheish Ben Kilayim, even if there's shatnez in it, that's like wild. What are you supposed to do with shatnez? But all these things is if they can be used for Yom Tov. Now, if you look at the side, there's a different girsa of the Mishnah. Even though it's not for Yom Tov, since it's, even if in principle, even if practically it's for to use afterwards, since hypothetically it could be used now, that's sort of the different girsos, therefore it's allowed. But we're going to have to figure out is how could it hypothetically be used now. Okay? But according to the other girsa of the Mishnah, it means even if your intention was to be used after Yom Tov, since it's hypothetical possibility, that suffices. Of a low sandal hamisumar, not a nailed sandal, which the rabbis forbade people to wear on Shabbos and Yom Tov because of a certain story, which we'll find out about. The low min al she'enu tafur, or a non-sewn shoe which has no use at all, no even hypothetical use, until you sort of sew up the leather and so on. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af lo min al lavan, even a white shoe, meaning before the leather has been blackened, because you need a craftsman to blacken it. And again, there would be no theoretical use for this, even though it's sewn. Nobody goes out wearing white shoes, and there's no theoretical use for this. Anything that hypothetically you could benefit on Yom Tov, you can send, even if, as we said before, that's not your primary intention. So let's just read a little bit about how could you theoretically benefit from these things. I understand sewn up clothes, chazul malbush, you can wear them. She'ain form if they're not sewn up, nami chazul ksuya, you could use it as a blanket. You could use it to cover yourself with, even if you can't wear it yet. Ela kilayim, but shatnez, lemay chazi, what can you use shatnez for? Maybe you can use it to sort of put under you as a mat, so you don't wear shatnez, but you can sit on it. But we taught in the Beitzah, lo ya'aleh lecha, to beged kilayim shatnez lo ya'aleh lecha, a shatnez garment you should not place upon you. Biblically, you can have it as a mat underneath you. You're not wearing it; it's just a cushion. That's biblically. But the sages said, Amu chachamim. You can't do it. Maybe a strand will go on your flesh and it will be ya'aleh lecha. It won't just be under you. Okay, so you can't use it for a mat. What I'll do is I'll have it as a mat below the pillow. So it's not possible that a string will go on me, because there'll be a mat, there'll be kilayim, a pillow, and then my tush. So maybe that should be allowed. But I'm a Reb Shimon ben Pazi, I'm a Reb Yoshua ben Levi, I'm a Reb Yossi ben Shaul, I'm a Rebbe, Mishum Kila Kedisha Yerushalayim. Fascinating. Rebbe in the name of the holy community of Jerusalem. Afilu Eser Matzos, Zu Agav Zu. The kilayim tachtem, even 10 mats stacked up. It's like the princess and the pea. And the kilayim is on the very bottom. They did not let you, the rabbis, once they said you can't use it as a mat, it did not matter what the circumstances were. So we are going to pick up with this tomorrow and find out what possible use you could have for shatnez on Yom Tov, if not only can you not wear it, but you cannot even use it as a mat. Okay.
There's a picture of a small hand.